So if I have to say, one of my gripes, I've been to a lot of church conferences over the year, is that most of them are they're too random. And it's just like, what in the world am I going to hear from this particular conference? And I know for myself, usually going to conferences is not for the speakers, but it's just to meet people and get to know the people, which is fine. But then you're like, okay, well, if that's the point, then why do we need the speakers? So I have a personal gripe there. You know, I go to a lot of medical conferences, and they're very different. So like, I go to a conference called ASH, American Society for Hematology, and guess what? It's all about hematology, and you learn all about hematology, and you leave very educated about hematology, and it's very satisfying to go to a meeting like that, as opposed to sometimes the kind of random nature of church conferences. So this is intended to be different than the typical random meeting. And I want to introduce here a concept that I hope we can use throughout our time. This is a picture that I got from someone who originated. His name is Steve Viers. And he says to picture the life of the church, and in particular discipleship, as a river. So all the, your Sunday services, your midweeks, your accountability groups, all that, there's this river that's flowing. And we like to see a lot of people on the boat flowing down this river, moving, hopefully, efficiently through this river. That's normal discipleship. But then he notes, well, how does evangelism connect into that? Well, in fact, there's a little river that should be feeding into the big river, and he calls it actually preparatory discipleship. It's very interesting in the Sermon on the Mount, in the Great Commission in Matthew 28, when Jesus says, "Make disciples of all nations," he includes evangelism as part of discipleship. It's not broken out from that. It's part of what discipleship is. And so he calls evangelism preparatory or initial discipleship, and I like that. It should be feeding into that river. And he says it well. He says, churches must also be concerned about another aspect of discipleship, the issue of helping additional men and women find the river. Call this preparatory discipleship or initiatory discipleship. The point of this being included in the river diagram is that the same source of truth used in discipleship is also used in evangelism. The same truth and love apply. So I like that. That's a nice way to connect it. And then he talks about counseling. How does counseling fit into this? Well, today some of us were kayaking on the Mystic River. It was a pretty intense but really fun experience. And you can get sidetracked into areas where there's branches, or you maybe go in circles and you don't really know what you're doing. And what he pictures is the river has these eddies, or these areas off of the river where somebody can come off for a season and say, you know what, I can't handle going through the river right now. I need a time to fix the leak in my boat, or learn a skill, or what have you there. He puts it well and says, this is where biblical counseling fits into the equation. It is discipleship that is accelerated, but the point is it's still part of the river. It does not require a different source of truth or an entirely different set of methods. The beauty is that it is also temporary. The person stays in counseling only until he or she is ready to be plugged back into the regular discipleship means and methods of the church. Churches need to have ministries in place to help men and women who do not benefit yet from the normal discipleship means and methods of the church. Call it whatever you want, but just make sure it's in place. Please also be sure that it is a natural fit with everything else the church believes and practices. Okay, boats get leaks. People run into trouble. So 3 emphases that you're going to find of our conference are discipleship, evangelism, counseling. Right? So it's a nice way to remember all this with this diagram here. However, there are there's actually 4 special emphases that are drilling down specifically into subtopics. So the overall heading is discipleship, evangelism, counseling, but there's some special topics here. Is a quote from Matthew, which he gave in a sermon once. Our special emphasis is family life, and the quote he gave is, a church is supposed to be a family of families living like family. And I think we have sometimes forgotten, this was one of our initial strongholds that we established in Followers of the Way back in the day, and talked about it a lot, but we need to go back to that. strong families, strong marriages, children, adoption, incorporating singles into family life. All really important. Special emphasis number 2, conflict resolution. We're going to do 2 hours on this tomorrow. This continues our studies on this from the last couple of years. This is not a one and done topic, but it requires continual reinforcement, and we need to be proactive about it. Special emphasis 3, leadership and governance structure in the church. It's a little hard to read this quote, but this is John Maxwell. A lot of you know him. He has a quote where he says this a lot: everything rises and falls on leadership. He was recently in our office at Eventide. I got to spend a couple hours with him. And even now, in his later years, he's pounding the table. Everything rises and falls on leadership. So it's really important to spend some time on this. We'll be hearing about this tomorrow. And then last but not least is care for the poor. So this is a famous quote from Jesus in Luke 14 when he says, "When you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just." A little hard to see, but this is a photograph of Gaza, and right now there are starvation conditions happening there. What do we do about that? What can we do? So we have a speaker tomorrow who's going to be addressing some of this. So overall, there's 3 main topics. What are the 3 main topics? Discipleship, evangelism, counseling, and what are the 4 special subtopics? Family life, leadership. Yeah, it's fine. Conflict resolution and caring for the poor. Yep, good. So you should be able to remember that. Hopefully you can remember that. And I'm hoping we can go over this again and again and again at all of our conferences going forward. Okay, so when will this take place? Lord willing, the plan is to do this every 4th of July weekend. We've even talked about who our speakers might be for next year. If you have suggestions, they're welcome. We're trying to figure out a title as well for this conference. Right now we don't have a catchy title. Some good suggestions have come in. If you have a suggestion, I'd love to hear it. And then just as a reminder, too, we have 3 events per year that are intended for people from all of the Followers Way churches. So we had a homeschool conference in January. I know a lot of you were there for that. That was a successful event. In May, we have a camping trip. And in July, this conference. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brother Sam. A lot of you know Sam Baer. He was here last year. He did the 1-year program at Sattler.